In our top story this hour, the ANC's National Executive Committee will now consider a report from the party's Integrity Commission that recommends that Deputy Finance Minister David Masondo step aside over reports of an extramarital affair. He's also being asked to step aside as the head of the party's political school. Masondo says he will subject himself to ANC internal processes. He says he is aware that ANC members and leaders serve at the behest of the ANC and are expected to uphold the values of the movement and subject themselves to organizational processes. The under fire deputy minister also says he was not aware that the Integrity Commission had a problem with the syllabus of the political school and that that should be taken up with the board of the school. Meanwhile, the ANC in Gauteng has vowed to act decisively against corruption to protection and to preserve the brand of the ANC. This follows widespread allegations of impropriety in the awarding of tenders for the supply of the PPEs. The outrage was sparked when the Royal Baka project, which is owned by the husband of the presidential spokesperson Kuselo Diko, won a PPE tender forcing Diko to take leave of office pending investigations into the matter. Later on, the ANC in Gauteng also asked the Health MEC Dr. Bandile Masuku and his wife Loyiso Masuku, who is the MMC for Corporate Shared Services in the city of Johannesburg, to take leave of office. To discuss the brand that the ANC is, we now joined via Skype by political commentator Jamie Mighty. Jamie, good afternoon to you. Always good to have you here on the show.
Good afternoon to you and to the viewers at home.
Thank you so much indeed for coming through. So government has once again promised to act tough on corruption, but do you get a sense that this time they may be serious with this? I mean, you have a lot of people saying that, well, we've heard and seen this before, there's nothing new really.
Well, I do think that the atmosphere is such that they have to perform very strongly the appearance of being tough on corruption. I do think that because we're in the middle of this global pandemic, we're in the middle of a situation where 3 million people have lost their jobs. We were already in a recession, and there's a lot of anxiety amongst the people, and they are seeing the suffering that has been caused by COVID-19. So as a result of this, the kind of reporting we've seen around PPE corruption, PPE inappropriate behavior, and PPE wrongful beneficiation by people in and around high influential politicians is such that it would create a lot of public frustration. So I think it's critical to notice that the Gauteng ANC has taken a very strong approach, but that's not true necessarily of all of the different provinces wherein the ANC is a governing party and there has been an implication of corruption. We saw some complaints about the Eastern Cape, the scooters, as well as the tablet computers. We saw some complaints about overcharged tenders in KZN relating to the procurement of water tanks, the JoJo tanks. So even though there's a strong response from Gauteng and a strong response in certain sectors, I don't think that we've seen a coordinated and streamlined response across the organization. So it does dilute what the Gauteng ANC is trying to do. As for will they be more aggressive in taking action this time around, they may not really have a choice because as we saw between 2014 and 2019, the ANC lost almost 10% of the electoral vote, moving downwards in the trend. And what we've seen further is that they do have a lot of contestation politically, and then there's an election coming up. So with the economic conditions being the way they are, the perceptions around corruption being the way they are, they may really have to take a strong and coordinated response to this. However, right now, the response is not singular and common across and consistent across the board.
So let's just talk about Gauteng. So we had the Provincial Secretary Jacob Kawe speaking strongly really about the brand that the ANC is. But one could actually ask, could this be because we head into the local government elections maybe next year?
Well, the local government elections do have a lot of pressure that they're exerting on the brand ANC, because sometimes you can rebuild your narrative if elections are far away enough for you to rebuild public sentiment in your favor. But now, considering the two conditions, that we are in an economic recession, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and the elections are around the corner, you do definitely have to be very concerned about the organizational brand, which is why we saw some of the social media attempts yesterday to try to, galvanize all of the voters of the ANC who are still passionate about the brand in a pushback and almost in a rebranding effort. Unfortunately, I don't think that yesterday that was a successful campaign, simply because the moment right now is one where people are asking for accountability. And there's a big distinction between being held accountable and being attacked. So some of the rhetoric we saw from the organizational leaders seemed as if there was no appetite to take responsibility for the fact that there has been a series of corruption scandals emanating from within the organization. Even though it's not everyone within the ANC who's participating in this, you cannot ignore when critical prominent figures are implicated or when certain practices seem to be widespread to the point where there seems to be an organizational culture. If you look at food parcels, that's one of the criticisms that we saw. People were saying, look, the food parcels are not getting where they need to get to. And then you have the high-scale corruption wherein prominent people are being implicated. That does hurt the brand, but the way that you do that is by apologizing sincerely, not blaming the people for their frustration and anger, and then showing them the remedial path that you're going to take to fix that.
So let's just talk about that, the ANC trending on social media. As you say, yesterday it was the hashtag ANC Friday. We're waking up to a totally different hashtag on the ANC this morning. Do you believe that translates to votes? Because a whole lot of people on social media are talking about voting for the ANC and not voting for the ANC going forward, more so as we head into those local government elections. Should the ANC take a cue, perhaps, from what is happening, what's currently unfolding on the social media platforms?
Well, I would say that it would be a mistake not to take heed of social media conversations. There's generally an attitude that says that social media doesn't matter, these are not the real people on the ground. But I take the view that those people who are tweeting are actually behind their phones and they are committed enough to vocalize their opinion. When you also consider that the median age in South Africa is 26. That means the most number of people in this country gravitate around an age where social media activity is increasing, not decreasing. And increasingly we see that social media does set the tone for societal conversation in the same way that mainstream media does and in the same way that prominent individuals do. So whatever happens on social media does have some impact in the public discourse, in the public sentiment, and in public perception. And as you have more and more young people beginning to vocalize and express themselves on social media platforms and organize on social media platforms, I think it would be remiss to act as if that particular conversation is not one that's not important. But I will say this, I do think that the ANC does take social media seriously. That's why you have a lot of social media activity by a lot of their prominent politicians, Fikile Mbalula, even the president himself, whether it's him or someone running the account, there is an effect to try to actually participate on those platforms. And if you do pay attention to the presidential addresses, you can see that they are listening to mainstream media, but they're also listening to social media. I wouldn't discount its presence within the influential conversations of the political environment today.
All right, so you talk about the president. So let's just focus a bit on him, because when he became the president of the ANC, even that of the country, there was so much hope. A lot of people saying that it's the beginning of a new dawn. The Ramaphoria was all over the place. What do you think this has done to the brand that Cyril Ramaphosa is as the ANC president, but most importantly also as the president of the country?
Well, I think it would be fair to say that there has been some loss of enthusiasm around the New Dawn narrative, as well as the Ramaphoria and the Tumamina moment. It does seem as if more and more people are becoming skeptical of the capacity of the highest office in the land to, one, curb corruption within the organization, and two, redirect the nation towards a growth trajectory. I do think, however, to be fair to the president, his office has attempted to try to shield itself from some of these criticisms. When we saw the Minister of Communications being implicated in violating the lockdown regulations, that minister was dealt with. Some people may not have been happy, but there was an effort. In other administrations and in other administrations in Africa, you may not have seen that kind of a response. Similarly, now with the spokesperson, Kusela Diko, we've seen that the leave of absence has been requested. We've seen that Gauteng has taken a stronger position on this. We've even seen some action from the ANC Integrity Commission. So there is an effort from the president to try to preserve that brand, that this is a different presidency. This is a presidency that is trying to be, number one, efficient, number two, transparent, and number three, tough on corruption. The only challenge is it's unclear whether the president has the broad support of the organization in all of the interventions. And that's why we've seen some delays and debates around issues of getting a loan from IMF. We've seen a lot of disputes which seem to undercut the authority of the seat of the presidency. But that's also a result of coming in with a narrow majority, a very, very narrow majority at Nasrec.
So the reality is that the ANC of the first century was about a principled and selfless struggle to end apartheid. And I believe that promise was delivered upon in 1994. Can the party rebrand itself, perhaps to its days back in 1994, to its former glory? Is that even possible?
Well, I think it's going to be challenging now because there is this period of 26 years of administration where people are unhappy with, one, the quality of education, two, the quality of policing. We just saw the crime statistics yesterday. And three, they are also unhappy with the quality of healthcare and service delivery in their communities. So in order to rebrand, at some level, the ANC will have to start tackling the daily lived experiences of the average South African. So you cannot really go back to the narrative of being the liberation party with the high moral ground. That high moral ground has been conceded, and now I think more has to be done to show that, one, they are effective, two, they are transparent, three, they are able to actually address the underlying problems that exist. And those, as I've stated, are education, crime, healthcare, service delivery. So unless that is really dealt with in an aggressive format within the next 400 to 500 days, I do think that the ANC is going to face a serious challenge when it comes to the 2021 elections.
And one could also argue that the attacks that are directed at the ANC now, they are meant to be because that's the ruling party. It's basically what is happening even in other countries on the African continent.
Yes, this is why I think it's critical to differentiate an attack and accountability. When the public is frustrated with acts of corruption, with lack of delivery, with a sluggish economy, and actually with 3 million jobs being lost in this COVID-19 period, it's not a good response to go back to those people and say, you are attacking me. It's not an attack. It's merely them holding you to account. So I think that to look at the public response and judge it is not the right way to go about this. It's actually to look and say, look, the public is getting frustrated. I think the MEC for Education in Gauteng, Ms. Panyaza Lesufi, actually referred to that the public is increasingly losing confidence within the ANC, and we need to do something about that. So the anger is justified. The response from the public is justified. The challenge is going to be for the ANC. How do you respond genuinely, sincerely, and with action to the frustration that the people are experiencing, one, during COVID, but generally as a result of the 26 years preceding the COVID-19 crisis.
All right, Jamie, time constraints, I'm afraid. We thank you so much indeed for coming through.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much indeed. Jamie Mighty is a political commentator looking at the brand that the African National Congress, the ANC, is as a ruling party here in the country.